Hello and welcome to the Quality Standards webinar, Most Missed Standards During the Observation Visit. The goal of this webinar is to help you feel more comfortable and confident about the NAFCC standards. Since there are many right ways to meet standards, some providers get confused and are not sure how to meet the quality standards or wondering if they are doing enough. And so through this webinar, we hope that you leave with some ideas and some more confidence about meeting the standards. We will first give a brief history of the standards, what they are, and how they are organized. We will then dive into specific standards, starting with the most missed standards during the observation visit. Then we will cover star standards that are often missed or unobserved, and then we will finish up with unstarred standards. Please know that there are lots of questions that you may have in regards to standards, so if you do not receive an answer to some of your questions during this webinar, you are always welcome to email us at accreditation@nafcc.org with your specific questions regarding standards. The NAFCC standards are research and expert-based practices that will be the foundation of your high-level quality family child care program. They are practices or habits that you will need to implement into your program to become accredited. They have been shown through peer-reviewed research to be the best in child care practices. The standards were developed through a 4-year consensus building process that included hundreds of providers, parents, resource and referral staff, and other early childhood experts. Key in the development of NAFCC accreditation standards were 53 community work groups that met across the country. These work groups held a series of discussions to define quality in family child care, to give specific indicators that would help others recognize high quality care in the field, and to envision the NAFCC accreditation process. An extensive review of research findings in the field resulted in the development of the first draft of the standards. Hundreds of individuals, diverse in region, race, ethnicity, income, education, and job role, responded to successive drafts of the standards. More than 400 respondents rated the importance of the proposed standards and suggested changes and improvements. Analysis of statistical differences among subgroups were used to design standards that are truly respectful of differences in cultural values. There's a lot that we could talk about tonight about the history of the standards, but I just wanted to give you that brief rundown because we here at NAFCC want you to know that these standards were not created lightly, but that every standard we ask you to implement to become accredited is backed up by research and at least 1,000 other pairs of eyes that have reviewed them and feel that any provider can make it happen if they want a high quality program. We have a body called the Accreditation Council that reviews the standards yearly. They continually keep themselves up to date on the latest research to know if revisions or new standards are necessary, as well as work with research groups and universities to make those updates and ensure that there is no bias during the making of these important changes and implementations. The quality standards are organized numerically and divided into 5 content areas: relationships, the environment, developmental learning activities, safety and health, and professional and business practices. The quality standards are located in your Benchmarks to Quality book by level, but can also be found listed out numerically on our website. To find this list, visit our homepage at nafcc.org, and you can look up NAFCC Accreditation Quality Standards. When an observer comes to your home, they will be evaluating you on all of the quality standards that you will find in the numerical quality standards list. However, they will be working through a workbook that has them in a slightly different order, which I have listed on the PowerPoint slide, which are routines, relationships, developmental learning activities, environmental checklist, and records. I sometimes have providers get worried because they see that the observer is working in a different book, but please be assured that they are all the same exact standards that you have studied. They are just organized in a different manner, in a different order, in a way that makes it easier for the observer to observe all of the standards in your program. Studying simply from your Benchmarks to Quality book, where you can find, studying simply from your Benchmarks to Quality book will be sufficient because there you can find all the quality standards that will help you be prepared. Here at NAFCC, we like to say that there are many good ways that providers can implement the standards. Some examples of our quality standards are listed here. For example, in a relationship standard, you may read, the provider recognizes signs of stress in children's behavior and responds with appropriate stress-reducing activities. An example of environmental standard, the arrangement of the home and the use of space are balanced to meet the needs of both the child care program and the provider's family. And one last example from our safety and health section, infants under the age of 1 are placed on their backs for sleeping. As you can see, some of the standards are very straightforward and clear, such as standard 4.35, that infants are to sleep on their backs, while other standards can be a little bit broader. Many providers get confused when they are given a broad standard and often call in to ask what exactly they need to do to pass that standard. And the answer is that there are many good ways that you can meet that standard. Let's go ahead and do an example. So for the first example in relationships that you can see on the screen, the provider recognizes signs of stress. So you could ask yourself, what kinds of signs of stress do the children in your program show? You'll come up with a lot of different answers. You might come up with that they get angry, they cry, they hide. There's going to be a plethora of answers for what stress is going to do to a child in your program. Now think about how you could attend to that stress or how you could help alleviate that stress in that child. You may sing a song, you may read a book, you may try to redirect them to a different activity. As you can see, there's lots of other answers that go to answer that question. So in order to meet this standard, you can see that there are lots of solutions that you could come up with, since there are lots of different signs of stress that might come from your children in your program. So there is no one answer fits all in all situations. So many of these standards are left up to you to determine what is best for you, your program, and the children you take care of. Now that we know what the standards are, their history, how they are organized, let's go ahead and get into some specific standards. I want to go ahead and play a game with you. If you're watching this, go ahead and read through these standards, and I want you to think to yourself what you think is the most missed standard. So let me read them out loud. The first, the provider serves nutritious and sufficient food. Second, the provider reads to children for at least 15 minutes each half day. Third, the provider washes her hands with soap and water. And four, working smoke, fire, and carbon monoxide detectors are properly installed according to manufacturer's instructions. All right, you had a second to think about it. Which one do you think is the most missed standard? As we go through all of these slides and talk about the most missed standards and some other commonly missed or most asked about questions, please know that all of the standards are important. We are just focusing on some that are mostly missed or ones that we have lots of questions about. So make sure that you take enough focus and care on all the standards as you're preparing for NAFCC accreditation, but know that this webinar has been created to help alleviate some stress about some of the most missed standards. So let's see if you got it right. The very most missed standard is 3.68. The provider reads to all children for at least 15 minutes during each half day. Books are used to stimulate conversation that expands upon children's interest and imagination, to build vocabulary, or to introduce new ideas and information. If the children or infants have short attention spans and can't attend to the stories, reading time can occur in brief moments and be comprised of showing and talking about the pictures, colors, and textures in the book. Children who can read independently spend at least a half an hour each half day engaged in literacy activities, such as reading, writing, listening to stories, or performing in plays. So this standard is very important. It is often scored less than fully met or not even met at all. The reason it's so important is because we are helping children prepare to read and to prepare to be successful in school, because most of the children that we'll be providing care to are preschool age or younger, might be infants or babies. So we want to make sure that we are meeting this standard as well as we can. And the reason it's less than fully met is usually because of the time. You need to make sure that it's at least 15 minutes during each half day. So if you have a full day, then that means 15 minutes in the first half of the day, 15 minutes the second half of the day, for a full 30 minutes. Observers will time you during the observation visit. So a tip that I like to give providers is to go ahead and practice yourself. Have a timer with you each day and just practice trying to get to that 15 minutes every day if that's something that you struggle with. We know that sometimes children lose interest, so let them go and then just try again later. Those 15 minutes don't have to all be in one 15-minute sitting. It can be dispersed throughout the half day, but just make sure you get to that 15 minutes. Put it in your routine to have a reading time if that's going to help you. Do it during lunchtime or meal times if that's going to help. Have someone sitting down and reading to them. Whatever you have to do to meet those 15 minutes, go ahead and practice with the timer. Try implementing into your routine if you haven't already. Those are some suggestions I have for you to meet this standard. Okay, the second most often missed standard is 4.80. The provider serves nutritious and sufficient food. following child and adult care food program guidelines. If parents bring the food, the provider assures that it is nutritious or supplements it. So just remember to return to basics. A lot of times observers say that they just forget the basics. They don't have bread, or they don't have milk, or they don't have vegetables. So if you need help thinking of nutritious meals, you can always go to myplate.org or find other resources, go take some other trainings to learn about some more nutritious meals that you might be able to serve. If you don't serve food in your programs, but parents bring the food, and let's say they didn't pack a vegetable, make sure you have vegetables available so that way that it is there for them. This doesn't mean that the child has to eat the food, because we know that sometimes there are children that are a little bit pickier than others, or don't want to eat maybe as well as another child does, but we do have to offer those nutritious options to them to meet this standard. Third most often missed standard is 4.1 through 4.4, which reads, children under the age of 3 are in the provider's line of sight always, except when attending to personal needs for up to 5 minutes. The provider assures the safety of all children while attending to her personal needs. Children aged 3 and older may be out of the provider's line of sight for short periods of time if the provider is close by and listens carefully to assure all children are safe. Children under the age of 6 are never inside or outside by themselves. When children are inside, the provider is inside. When the children are outside, the provider is outside. When children are sleeping, the provider can hear them. The provider visually checks on infants under the age of 8 months every 15 minutes, and the provider's own children may sleep in their own bed regardless of age. So, providers often get worried about the children under age 2 having to always be in your line of sight, especially when it has to do with infants or toddlers sleeping. I've had providers hire assistants to help with this, and I've also had some who keep the toddlers and infants asleep where play activity is going on, so they can keep them in the line of sight, or, which I found to be the most common solution, is to have a video baby monitor, so you can have the video monitor with you at all times and see the sleeping toddlers and infants, but still attend to the other children if they are awake. However, just make sure to know that monitors aren't going to cover everything, that in order to meet this standard, you still have to go visually check on the infants every 15 minutes. So you cannot do that 15 minutes through a visual monitor. You will have to go into that room and visually check them. But during the sleeping time, you are allowed to use a monitor to meet the first part of the standard. So if you go back, the first part of the standard being that children under the age of 3 are always in the provider's line of sight. Another concern I sometimes get is, what is a personal need? Usually we refer to personal needs as attending to the restroom, or if you have some other personal need that you have, a quick phone call. Just make sure that if you are attending to a personal need, that you leave the children in a safe environment while you're attending to that personal need. Okay, and the fourth most often missed standard is 4.38, working smoke, fire, and carbon monoxide detectors are properly installed according to manufacturer's instructions. Smoke and fire devices are on each floor of the home. Smoke and fire devices and carbon monoxide detectors are adjacent to or where children sleep. Monthly maintenance checks of all equipment are conducted and recorded, including batteries being charged annually or as needed. So this one is often scored less than fully met, because there aren't enough enough carbon monoxide detectors, or they're not where they're supposed to be. In the standard, it mentions that they need to be adjacent to where children sleep, so make sure that you have those. And then also, if your home is fully electric, you will still need to have those carbon monoxide detectors separate from that. And that is just because the other part of the standard, that they need to be adjacent to where children sleep. When it's electric, we don't always know where they are, or an observer can't see it. So you want to make sure that you have carbon monoxide detectors where they need to be, and that the smoke and fire alarms are, of course, always working. Okay, so now we're going to move on to some of the starred standards that are often scored less than fully met or simply not observed. So make sure that these are important, though they're not the top 4. These ones are still important and often missed. So 4.34, children are never left alone on a changing table. The provider keeps one hand on the child, or diapering occurs on a non-porous mat on the floor. So often this one is less than fully met because a provider forgets the diaper, or a provider forgets the wipies. And so they turn to go grab the wipe, and then they've taken their hands off the child. So just make sure that you're prepared when you go to diaper a child. 4.39, a fully charged and operable ABC type fire extinguisher is in plain sight and available in or near the kitchen and on each floor of the home used for family child care. All extinguishers are inspected and tagged annually. Non-rechargeable extinguishers shall be replaced according to the manufacturer's instruction. So observers often just don't observe this standard because they don't want to be nosy or snoopy and digging into your things to find the fire extinguisher. So you want to make sure that your fire extinguisher is in plain sight, just as the standard reads. You also want to make sure that it's on each floor that you use for childcare. So if you just use one floor, it just needs to be on that one floor. And then make sure that they're inspected and tagged annually or as needed. So I often have had providers tell me that in their specific state, they require that the fire extinguisher be where a child can't access it. So they wonder how they can meet the standard in having it in plain sight, but not so in plain sight that the children can access it. So if it is a little bit more hidden, like if you had it in a pantry or under the sink of your kitchen or something like that, you just really want to make sure that it's obvious. So you can maybe put a sign or an arrow that says fire extinguisher here. So if any parent were to come in or any other adult come in and see that there's a fire or some sort of emergency, they would know exactly where to find the fire extinguisher. If you can keep the pantry door open or something, so it is more in plain sight, that's what we'd like you to do. But just make sure that it's in as plain sight as you can, and if it can't be so plain in sight that a child can see it, then make sure there's a sign or make sure that there's some other indicator that shows where it is. You can also ask your local fire department if they have recommendations. Okay, another required standard that is often scored not observed is 4.31. The provider has a first aid kit readily accessible but out of reach of children. The kit must include, or it can include, but it's not limited to, first aid instructions, disposable non-porous gloves, soap and water, tweezers, bandage tape, sterile gauze, scissors, thermometer, adhesive bandages, cold pack, CPR mouth guard. So the reason that this one is not observed is similar to the other one. An observer just doesn't see it, so you want to make sure that it's in plain sight, or that at least you indicate to them that this is my first aid kit. Also make sure that you have everything in the kit. Sometimes I have providers say, well, not everything fits in the kit. Can I have some things close by? And no, you really want to have everything in the one kit, because when an emergency happens, you want to have everything ready to go and have it all in one place safely. So you're not dropping things, so you're not forgetting something. It's all there in the kit. So if you need to buy a bigger kit, buy a bigger kit. And then also just make sure that you have these things that are listed. Sometimes maybe a provider will check, and if they're missing something, they might not give you a full score. So make sure that you have everything that's on this list, and then maybe some extra things if you have a child who has a specific need to have those things in there, or whatever you think you need to have in your first aid kit. Okay, standard 4.14, there's a working telephone, and emergency phone numbers are easy to access by all caregivers. Emergency phone numbers include parents' daytime numbers or local emergency numbers for ambulance, police, fire department, poison control, a nurse, doctor, or other medical consultant, emergency backup caregiver, and 2 backup contacts for each child. So this one's often not observed, either because the list isn't accessible, or because you might have a cell phone that you're hiding. You are more than welcome to use a cell phone. You don't have to have a landline in order to meet this standard, but make sure that the observer knows that you use your cell phone, that it's in your pocket, or that it's on the table, or wherever you keep it. Just make sure that the observer knows where it is and what you use. Okay, this next standard is often scored not observed. 4.78, prescription medication is only administered from the original container with the original label intact. Listing the child's name, written prescription directions are always followed. The provider obtains written permission of the parent and administers medication as prescribed by the child's health care professional. Non-prescription remedies may be administered with both written directions and permission from a parent or guardian. The first dose of any medication, including prescribed medications, topical ointment, and other non-prescription remedies, is first administered outside of the child care. So this is often not observed just because sometimes you don't always have to give medication to a child. So during the interview portion of your observation, describe the procedure to how you would give medication to a child to the observer. You could show them where you keep the parents' the child's health information and the parents' written signatures and writing, whether it's in your binder, wherever you keep it, show them where that is. The observer doesn't necessarily need to see this being met in the moment. So just like I said, mention it during your observation visit. Sometimes I've had the question from providers, what does it mean by the first dose of any medication? So if a child has never taken Tylenol before, you can't administer that. You have to administer a medication that has been administered outside the home before. So then, for obvious reasons, so a parent knows how a child reacts to a medication. We can never give a medication that has never been administered before. So just make sure that before you give a medication that you know from the parent that they've taken it before. Another required standard often not observed. Children always sit down to meals and drink beverages. Meals and snacks are not rushed, nor are children forced to stay at the table more than a few minutes after they finish eating. There's no use of screen media at this time. And then food, including breast milk, is stored, prepared, and served into children in a safe, sanitary manner. Solid food is cut into cubes no larger than 1/4 of an inch for babies and 1/2 inch for toddlers. So the last standard we read, we just obviously want to make sure that food is cut up to a size that children are going to be able to eat, that there's not going to be a choking hazard. And then the previous standard, 4.89, a child, we don't want them to be running around the house with food. That's also a choking hazard. We want to make sure that they're eating and drinking sitting down so that we don't have any accidents. And like the standard says, you don't have to force the child to finish eating, but if they want to eat, they have to be sitting down. And then there's no screen use, no media at that time, because we want them to be focused on their nutrition and eating. Okay, now we're going to start getting into some non-starred standards. There might be a couple that pop up, so if I do see one, I'll let you know, so it'll be brought to your attention. But we're going to go into some routine standards that are often scored not met. So 3.29, if a child wears a diaper, the provider does a visual check at least once every 2 hours and changes them as needed if wet or soiled. So just make sure that we're not getting diaper rashes, we're not getting infections, we're not getting sick. We gotta make sure that we're changing diapers. 4.107, children's hands are washed with soap and running water and dried with individual disposable or single-use cloth towels at the following times: upon arrival, before and after handling food or playing in water or with sand or Play-Doh that is used by more than one person, after toileting, diapering, contact with bodily fluids, handling animals, cleaning, handling garbage, and playing outdoors. Alcohol-based sanitizer is a suitable alternative for children over the age of 24 months only when running water is unavailable. Pre-moistened wipes do not effectively clean hands and should not be used as a substitute for washing hands with soap and water. Soap and water is really important. Soap and water helps keep us healthy and safe and away from disease. So it is crucial that you meet this standard, that you're always washing with soap and water at all of these times that we have listed. Like the standard says, alcohol-based hand sanitizer is suitable for children over the age of 24 months and only when running water is unavailable. So if you have running water and soap available, always use it, because that's what's going to keep our children clean. Okay, standards relating to physical activity. 3.25, the provider takes the children outdoors when neighborhood conditions are safe, 1 to 2 or more times during the day, for a total of at least 60 minutes per day, weather permitting. Now, I'm just going to take a pause there. A lot of providers ask me the question, well, what is weather permitting? My state has specific standards and rules about what is weather permitting and what is not weather permitting. So this is up to you and up to your state. So if your state, for some reason, has a higher standard than an NAFCC, then go ahead and use that. So for example, I had someone say that their state doesn't let them go out if it's less than 32 degrees. Perfect. So then that's your standard. Don't go out if it's less than 32 degrees. Another state said that they won't go out if it's less than 40. So go ahead and follow what the state says. Don't go out if it's less than 40. And then also just use your best judgment. If it's raining, you're obviously not going to want to take your kids out if there's a lot of rain, because they're going to get sick. They're going to get cold. If it's snowing a lot and children aren't prepared for snow, don't take them outside. You know how to use your best judgment on that. And then just as the end of the standard says, during colder and warmer weather temperature, just make sure that children are dressed appropriately for outdoor play. Standards relating to physical activity that are often not observed. 3.81, the provider encourages children to dance or use movement as a method of self-expression to recreate meaningful experiences, tell stories, or act out concepts. And then this next one is a STARD standard, so pay attention to this one. Children are engaged in large motor activities for at least 30 minutes each half day, either indoors or outdoors. These activities may occur at one time or may be accumulated during each half day. So this can be, you can complete this in part with going outside or in doing activities inside, but just make sure that at least 30 minutes in each half day are large motor activities, making sure that children are really moving and getting to use their bodies. And you can even meet this standard hand in hand with 3.81, making sure that they're dancing, making big movements, expressing themselves. Okay, the next couple slides are standards about emotions and feelings. These are really important because children need responsive caregiving, and these standards intertwine a lot in the relationship and development sections of the NAFCC standards. So there's quite a few that we'll cover in these next couple of slides that are very important. So 1.8, the provider recognizes signs of stress. We talked about this in our practice that we did earlier in the webinar. 3.33, this is a STARD standard, so pay attention to this one. Guidance is positive and appropriate for the developmental abilities of each child and is used to help children gain self-control and take responsibility for their own behavior. 1.19, the provider supports children in developing friendships. And 1.2, the provider supports children in identifying and describing their own feelings and those of others. So going back to STARD standard 3.33, it's often not observed. Sometimes this makes sense because the children were so engaged that there was no need for a child to gain control over their impulses. Or it could be because a provider doesn't want to talk to children about their feelings. It might be something that makes them uncomfortable. So make sure that you're practicing talking about feelings every day. And then if for some reason any of these aren't observed, you'll have the opportunity during your interview with your observer to talk about it. So if you just didn't have a chance to help support a friendship or something along those lines of one of these standards, you can demonstrate that in your interview. You can say, well, this is what I would do to help develop the friendship. This is what I've done in the past to help this child be more friendly with another child. Okay, a couple more. 3.39, the provider helps children to gain awareness of other people's feelings and understand how their own actions affect others. The provider supports children in resolving conflicts and disagreements by assisting them as needed and communicating their feelings and finding solutions. The provider helps children learn to respect the possessions, personal space, and activities of others. And the provider minimizes toddlers' frustrations through redirections. For the first two standards listed on the slide, providers often respond that they'll tell children to say that they're sorry during the observation in response at the interview. You can always remember to validate the child's feelings and give the child opportunity to find a solution as well. Don't solve all their problems. That's a way you can help meet this standard. And then also for the last standard listed on this slide, the provider minimizes toddlers' frustrations through redirection. That's a time you can give examples at the interview. If you don't get the chance to during the day, just talk about that with your observer at the time of the interview. For those who struggle with feelings or would like to learn more about children and feelings and emotions and how to help raise an emotionally intelligent child, there's a book that I recommend to providers that I really like, that I've read before and really enjoyed, by John Gottman. It is titled Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. That's a good read if you're needing help with some of these standards. Of course, there are lots of other resources and books that can help you with this if this is something you struggle with. Most often scored not observed. As opportunities arise, the provider allows children to experience the natural consequences of their own negative behavior in a safe, non-threatening manner. We've talked about this a tiny bit in the last two slides. The provider helps children understand and respect people who are different from themselves. The provider responds factually to children's curiosity about similarities and differences among people. So these two standards are just often not observed for the reasons that we mentioned before. Only so much can happen in a day. So you just might have perfect children that day, which would be great and what we hope. So you don't get the chance to talk about those things. But during an interview, you might be able to talk about those things, especially for 3.46. it's really important to address to children their questions and to answer their questions factually and respectfully. So, for example, if there's a child who's using crutches and the child asks why he's using crutches, you could just answer honestly and kindly saying he's using crutches because his legs don't work or his legs were broken, so they hurt him right now, so that's why he's using the crutches. Whatever you want to say, but just make sure you're factual and make sure that you're being respectful as well. Learning activities most often scored not observed. 3.70, the provider builds on children's emerging interests in print and writing. And then there's some examples listed there. And then 3.71, children learn math and science concepts in the context of everyday activities. And there's some activities listed there. So when you're having your observation, you want to try to have just a typical day when the observer is there. Sometimes there's just not enough time in the day to do everything. And so that's why some of these activities aren't observed, just because you don't have time to do writing, or you don't have time to do math, or you don't have time to do science. But in order to meet this standard, make sure that these activities are available. So during free time and free play, children can have the option to write, to color, to write stories, or they can have the option to practice cooking or gardening or playing games like chess that would help with their math and science concepts. So if you get to the observation and these items didn't get touched on, you can talk about in the interview, but just try to have these activities available maybe in a certain area in your program. Make sure it's inviting, that way they can have that option to do that if they want to, and that's how you can meet the standard. This next slide is very similar. Having these are not observed just because maybe there's not enough time or you didn't get the opportunity to do it. So having opportunities indoors and outdoors to explore natural and physical environment, those are some examples listed there. And then 3.73, the provider encourages children age 3 and older to observe and make predictions about things in the learning environment, asking questions about why and how and what if. Just trying to make those a part of your day. You can practice that when you're outside asking questions. And then this next slide talks about art. Same thing as when we were talking about math activities or writing activities. Sometimes writers just say, no, well, we do art on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but my observer came on a Wednesday, so that's why we didn't do art. You can still have art materials out and ready for children, so if they want to do that during their free time, they can do that. So 3.76 says that art activities are open-ended and child-directed. And children can decide what they want to do with that. And then 3.7, the provider comments on specific aspects of children's art, focusing on the children's exploration and use of materials. And then also we got to make sure that we are careful in the use of language as we're praising and encouraging, and that even if a child creates something that is not pleasing to our eye, we want to still mention that that could be pleasing to their eye and that they've done a great job with what they've done. So be careful with praise and making sure that we're always encouraging children. We're not putting them down, even if they draw something that we don't maybe particularly like, we're going to be encouraging. Most often scored less than fully met. Here's a couple standards. Provider sets out inviting art materials based on development needs, so that's just going back to our art thing. 4.102, toys and surfaces are cleaned and sanitized regularly. Toys that are mouthed by a child are not used by others until sanitized. If a child puts something in their mouth and then spits it out, you can take it and put it in a bucket to sanitize for later. You don't have to sanitize it in that moment, but just make sure that it's taken away so another child doesn't go and mouth it. 4.51, secure safety gates or barriers close off access to all stairs adjoining areas used for children under the age of 4. No pressure gates or accordion gates with large openings where a child's head can be entrapped. So make sure that when you're purchasing gates, or if you have a gate, that there aren't any large openings where children can get hurt. And then also make sure that you're blocking all your stairs. This is really important. This one has a special place in my heart because I had my child in childcare and they didn't have an appropriate gate, and a child opened it and my child fell down the stairs. So stairs are can be really dangerous. So please make sure that you're meeting that standard and having good gates. Alrighty, so we're almost to the end of our presentation. The next few slides that we'll be covering are going to be in regards to records. If you recall at the beginning of the presentation when I showed you how standards are divided up, you might recall that during the observation, the observer evaluates a section called records. For the observation, the records section has the smallest number of standards. So if you miss more than one standard in this section, you'll have a really low score and you can risk not receiving accreditation. So it's crucial that you meet all of these record standards. All the record standards can be found under the professional development section of your benchmarks to quality or your quality standards. So these next couple slides, we're going to go through all the record standards so you make sure you understand them all and so you can meet all of them. So though they're not starred standards, try to consider them as starred standards, because if you don't meet more than one, then you'll risk not becoming accredited. So 4.84, the current daily or weekly menu is posted and shared with parents unless providers provide food modifications are noted when changes occur. So just make the menu available. 4.26, the provider conducts monthly emergency drills and keeps log, which includes the type of drill, date and time of the drills practiced. And 5.23, the program is covered by insurance, including accident insurance for children and assistants if employed, professional business liability insurance, and vehicle insurance. A lot of times providers don't meet the liability insurance part, so try to get that. If you can have liability insurance, please make sure that you do have it. If you feel like that's not something you want to have or can't have, then just know that you're putting yourself at risk by not having that type of insurance for your accreditation. But of course, it's your decision. Standards 5.22, the provider gives written policies to parents. Areas covered in written policies may include, but not limited to, substitute care arrangements, persons authorized to pick up the child, illness, medication administration, emergencies, guidance and discipline, developmentally appropriate learning activities, use of screen media, parent participation in conference, if relevant, transportation, field trips, and religious activities, and teaching are also included in written policies. Just have it all written down. Records 5.34, the assistant, unless the family member has a written job description defining responsibilities, the provider conducts an annual review of the assistant's job performance. So make sure that you have that review written down or recorded so that if an observer wants to see that, they can. The provider keeps accurate daily attendance records of children, making sure the children are signed in and out each time they enter the program. I have providers ask me if this needs to be paper or if they can do it electronically. You can do it electronically if you like, but you need to make sure that parents can sign in and sign out, because you need to know who's coming to pick up the child and who's taking the child home. So if there is an app that lets you sign and have a name of who did that, that's great, you can use that, but just make sure that you do have the person's name who's picking up the child and who's taking the child home, and of course the date and time. And then the last of our record standards, 5.17, the provider or sponsoring agency has a signed child care contract with each family, and most of you probably already meet this, but if you need some more ideas, areas covered in the contract can include hours, fees, payment schedule, provider and child's vacation, provider and child's sick leave and absences, responsibility for alternate care, and termination policy. So that is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that we were able to cover some standards that you may have had questions about. If you still have questions, you are always welcome to email us at accreditation@nafcc.org with your questions. Also, you can join our Facebook groups. Most of you are probably, if you are working accreditation for the first time, you'll want to join our NAFCC Accreditation Candidates in Process page. There you can ask your questions and other providers will answer with their experiences or with what they have done to meet standards in the past. So if you're needing ideas and want multiple opinions, you can go on that page. If you're already accredited, you could join the NAFCC Accredited Providers page and ask your questions there. And then if you're an observer, you can also join our NAFCC Observer page and then ask and answer questions there. Our phone hours are from 8:30 to 2:30 Mountain Standard Time. Like I said, if you have any other questions, visit those resources. Thank you so much again for attending the webinar. If you would like to receive CEU credit for watching this webinar. Visit our website for more information on how to receive CEUs, to take a quiz, to receive the CEU credit. Otherwise, thank you for attending, and I hope this information has been helpful to you. Have a great day.